Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I've been listening to the debate intently. It's been very informative and interesting in the responses. I have a few questions for the proponent of the bill through you.
Proceed, sir.
Thank you. First, I look in the statutes for voter registration, and under Section 923N, it states that the eligible agencies for applying for voter registration must be designated as a voter registration agency. I see nothing in this statute that designates the Department of Housing as a voter registration agency. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative McGee.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, if we look in lines 3 down to lines 5, we're including housing authorities as defined in Section 8-39, similar to Department of Social Services and the Labor Departments, as well as DMV. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
Thank you for that clarification, and I oversight there. I did not see the term voter registration, but clearly the intent of the language is there. Secondly, the good representative from Wallingford asked a question concerning eligibility requirements, and if I understood the proponent correctly, I believe he cited the section lines beginning on line 18 for the requirements. I think specifically was in about lines 24 through 29. Is that correct? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative McGee.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, it's actually lines 29 through 36, and it outlines the requirement process. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
And I thank you for that answer, but I would note that that section is entirely under the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles. There is no mention of the Department of Housing in there or any housing official in there. So I'm curious where the requirements come from for the Housing Authority to know what the requirements are. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative McGee.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, again, we're simply applying the same process that one would go through at Department of Social Services, Labor Department, DMV, minus the actual filing of the voter application itself. In this particular amendment, this bill that I'm proposing today, hopefully today, would allow for the tenant to actually deliver his or her voting application to the registrar of voters in said municipality. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
And I thank you for that answer. And I guess I'm going back to that section is dealing with specifically the Motor Voter Application, Motor Voter Act instantiation and direction of the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles. It does not apply to the Department of Housing, Social Services, anything else. That section purely applies to things. So I then go down to, I believe that in line 68, it's actually section 912 of the general statutes that defines that requirement, and it says you're eligible to be admitted pursuant to section 912. When you go look at that, that is the requirements for voter registration. I believe that's what the Department of Housing would be charged with, a housing authority would be charged with for verifying. And I believe the good representative, Presley Wilson, already went through that point, so I won't rehash that. The next question I had is related to, applied versus accepted, provided the time a household applies. And then also, so that's in line 2 of the amendment, and then you go to line 68 to 70 of the underlying bill, which says that the housing authority shall assist an individual in completing the form if requested, I'm paraphrasing. If they're applying, how would the housing authority assist the individual in filling it out since they don't have an address yet? And so what is the intent of handing an application out to an applicant as opposed to somebody who's been accepted and is actually moving in? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative McGee.
Just want to pull up the amendment. Through you, Mr. Speaker, again, these applications, voting applications, would be provided at the time the household applies for or has been accepted for admission. So the goal of it is to, again, for that prospective tenant, once accepted, will then submit that voter registration to the municipality. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
And I appreciate that that would be the appropriate time to submit it, but I'm curious why it's when they apply that we would provide that information And once again, how would the Housing Authority be able to assist in completing out the form if the applicant requested that assistance at the time of application? So I'm unclear as to the intent of why at the time of application. I can clearly see at acceptance they now have an address. So what is the intent of providing that information at the time of application? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative McGee.
Again, it's a prospective tenant. Usually 9 times out of 10, individuals are using their vouchers to live at a particular facility, a housing facility, and usually these tenants accept whatever they're offered. And so at this time, it would be a great opportunity while they're applying for that voting application to be provided. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative France.
Thank you for that. I still have concerns over that issue. And I've listened, as I said, intently to the debate and a lot of the questions that have arisen here. And I have great concern that this bill did not come before the GAE committee, which has the cognizance over this particular matter and voter registration. I also note that the Secretary of State did not provide testimony. I do accept the attestation of the proponent that her office is supportive of this. But given the substantial expansion of the role of registering to vote, I'm greatly concerned that the GAE committee did not have an opportunity to weigh out a lot of the questions that were asked here that should have been fleshed out and done with. And with that, I offer a motion to refer this to the GAE committee.
And the clerk will announce the tally.
On the motion to refer House Bill 5844 to GAE, total number voting 144, necessary for passage 73. Those voting yea 58, those voting nay 86, absent not voting 6.
The motion to refer fails.
Well, I'm disappointed. I believe that we're looking at a significant change to how we register voters, and I believe that the Government Administration and Elections Committee has the cognizance over this process. Not to take anything away from the great work that the Housing Committee does, but this is not their purview. It's not their area of expertise of how the voter registration happens. It's within the cognizance of the Government Administration and Elections Committee. And I'm also disappointed that from my colleagues who shared with me that there was discussion in committee and a commitment made that it would be referred to GAE, that it was not done. And so I have concerns, and I also listened to the debate, and a lot of the questions that were asked should have been asked and answered during the committee process and brought forward probably a better bill. That would have been thinking. I also don't accept that the intent of Section 923N for voter registration agency has been met merely by adding and housing authority to an existing level of statute within this bill. While I accept the proponent's assertion that the Secretary of State's office supports that, once again, I don't know that the Secretary of State's office knew about this bill, because why would they look at the Housing Committee's agenda for bills of cognizance? They would look at GAE, because that is the committee that has cognizance over the Secretary of State. And so for all those reasons, I have great concern that what we've got here was not well thought out in the sense of enacting. While well-intended, I have concerns that we have holes in this process that have been outlined in the debate that has happened tonight. And for those reasons, I recommend that my colleagues vote against. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.